How's it going, everybody? Dan from TCS here. Today we're going to be demonstrating to you a installation of the new KA1 in this Kato SD70Ace. As you may know, TCS recently re-released the new KA1s and KA2s with the intention of allowing them to be installed into smaller spaces such as N Scale. So today we're going to be demonstrating the full installation process of that. Like I said, in this Kato SD70Ace. We pulled this locomotive out of our stock and we found that it was a very good candidate for a new installation. We wanted to share that with you. So let's dive on into it. So as you can see in here, we have the original DC board in here. Now that we've removed the shell, the next thing that we're going to do is remove these brass tabs off of the side of the board. I'm just going to do that with my thumbnail. Okay. So on this particular model, the frame sticks up a little bit right here toward the front, which prevents either the DC board or your factory installed DCC board from sliding backwards directly. So what you'll need is a small screwdriver like this one. And what you'll need to do is get in there just a little bit underneath on the one side or the other, and then gently lift up. You don't want to break it, just enough so that it comes up above that stop, and then you just slide it on back and it pops right out. We'll just actually set this aside here because we're not going to need that. And now what we'll do is we will take some measurements here and see how much room we're going to need to install our new KA1, which I have right here. So I'm going to grab some calipers and we'll be right back. Alright, so now I have my calipers, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a measurement here of this section toward the back of the locomotive to make sure that we have enough height clearance for the new KA1 to be installed underneath the decoder so that they don't hit each other and cause the board to flex or anything like that. We don't want that to happen. So I'm going to take a measurement of my KA1. So I'm going to zero out my caliper here and take a measurement. Now, I'm one of those crazy Americans who likes to use millimeters because I find them easier. But if you are more partial to inches, that's okay too. So at its widest part, you can see here that it's about 6 millimeters. If we compare that to this section of the frame right here, we can see that we have a little ways to go. Now we have a little bit of leeway here because the board will sit up just a wee bit higher than this hump here, but we want to make sure that we have more than enough room to work with. So this distance is approximately, we'll call it 3 millimeters. So what we're going to do here is we'll probably wind up taking about 2.5 millimeters off of the back of the frame here. And so we'll pop it downstairs and put it on the milling machine. But before we do that, we want to make sure that we take this apart the rest of the way, because you don't want to mill this with it still assembled, because if you have, or if you use a file as well, so you don't want to mill or file this while it's still together, because you'll have little flakes and fragments which could fall down into this gap. And if that's the case, you can short it out, and obviously that's never a good thing. So in order to avoid that, what we're going to do is start this disassembly process by taking both of the trucks out. As you can see here, the trucks have these little tabs on the inside which you can get to. We're going to take our screwdriver again and pull downwards on the truck just a little bit and press in on that tab. That's one released. And that's 2 released, and the truck just pops right out. The axle will come with it. That's fine. We can put that back in later. We're going to do the same thing for the other truck. So once again, we're just going to apply some downward pressure on the truck so it doesn't pop back into place, and boom, pops right back out. So that's the rear truck. That's the front truck. I'll try and remember that for when I come back. And then this fuel tank assembly with all this detailed stuff that goes around the outside just clips onto both ends. So you can just pop that right on off. Obviously you also want to be careful of these copper brass strips that run along both ends. You don't want to bend those, but as you can see here now the fuel tank's come off, and we can set that aside as well. The next thing I'll do is I'll take out these copper brass strips. And then the frame is simply clipped together by the motor. I'll pull it apart like this. Pull the motor out. And there you have it. We have our two frame halves. And now we can go ahead and take these down to the milling machine and get cracking on them. Alright, so we're back. The milling is complete. I've reassembled the locomotive and put the trucks and the fuel tank back on. So now we're ready to put in our decoder and also our keep alive. So for the decoder, we're going to be reusing Kato's copper brass tabs. And the reason being is that the tabs that come off of the motor here, like this one here, can sometimes be a little bit too short. This is a very specific thing. It kind of depends on the model. This one, for example, does have the tabs on the one side here, as you can see, is very short. And because of that, we have to use Kato's tabs. So what we're going to do next then is we're going to install some Kapton tape across this section right here in the middle. We don't want the decoder or the copper brass tabs to short out against the frame and damage the decoder, so we're going to install that tape, and I have some right here. Just going to cut off a short little section. It's alright if we go a little bit wider because we can always trim it down. We're going to install that right here where the motor tabs are going to go. And then we'll wrap it down the sides as well. I did cut a little bit extra here, but that's alright because what we're going to do is trim that off using an X-Acto knife. And then what we're going to do after that is actually roll it around underneath the frame just a little bit. So I'm cutting this a little bit long. And so since I've cut it a little bit longer, I can go ahead and take my tweezers or my short flat-headed screwdriver and tuck it underneath where the motor goes. And that helps seal the tape down so it makes a good seal and stays for a long time. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side here. Alright, so now that the tape has been installed, we can go ahead and put the decoder on. And to do that, we're going to do it the exact same way as the DC board was removed, except obviously in reverse. So for this guy, we have to be mindful of these bumps that are on the frame. So we're going to put it in on a slight angle so that the front of the board goes into the front of the frame. And then we're going to stop. Bring the back down gently. You don't want to apply too much pressure here, or you could snap the board. And we're just going to get it right underneath these tabs here in the back. And then just slide the whole board forward. I like to push down in the middle, and it just clips right in. So obviously we didn't snap the board, and it's a nice solid fit. So we're good to go on that one. And the next thing that we're going to do, now that the board is in here, is we're going to fit the copper brass tabs. What I like to do is, if they're a little bit corroded, which they sometimes can be, or if they have your grease from your fingers on, you can hit them with a piece of Scotch-Brite, or if you have a Brillo pad or anything like that, that's also very helpful if you do that. It makes sure that you have a good contact to your motor, which is always a good thing. Alright, so I did go ahead and hit these guys just a little bit with pizza Scotch-Brite, so now they're polished up. They don't have as much oxidation on them, which should make a better connection. The next thing that we're going to do then is install these onto the decoder. One of the things you need to be mindful of is these little, the third tab in the center can sometimes get bent downward toward the bottom of the clip. And if that's the case, then it's not going to clip onto the decoder as well. And what you can do in that situation is just go ahead and apply a little bit of pressure to it upward to bend it back into place. The pins should almost line up with one another, but there should be a little bit of a gap which will allow you to clip it onto the decoder. If it's a loose fit, you'll know that you need to do that. If it clips on nicely for you, then that's good. So we'll go ahead and install these guys onto here. Alright, so now we have the clips installed. The next step is optional, but I prefer it to make sure that you have the best connection you can possibly have. And that's going to be to solder these connections, these tabs, onto your decoder. So what I like to do then is just apply a small piece of tape. It doesn't have to be Kapton tape or electrical tape, it can just be regular tape, since there's no power going to be applied and you're taking it right back off. And all you're going to do with that tape then is you're going to apply it across widthwise here, just to apply some pressure to this connection to make sure that the tabs are lined up well and that they're compressed. That way when you solder it and make the joint is also forming in the same way that keeps the pin lined up properly. So with some electrical tape, I'm just going to cut off 2 short sections. Put one on one side. And one on the other side. And again, this is just to hold them in place. This is going to come right back off. I'm going to turn on my soldering station here. If you're working with a soldering iron or a soldering station like we are, even if it gives you the readout of the temperature, that doesn't necessarily mean that your soldering iron is at that temperature at that time. These soldering stations that we use get up to temp really fast, but that's a measurement across the filament, the heating element that's in the iron. So your tip is going to take significantly longer to heat up than that. It depends on the iron and it depends on the tip, because the more heat density the tip has to it, the longer it's going to take to heat up. So you want to make sure that you give your soldering iron more than enough time to heat up, because if you don't, then you're going to potentially be making cold solder joints, which are never a good thing. Alright, so now my soldering iron should be up to temperature, and I have a little bit of solder here. I don't need much, so I'm just going to knock a little bit off. We use really thin rosin core solder by Kester. We'll put a link to that in the video's description, and you can also find recommended practices and tips for soldering on our website. So now that we have the tape in place, what I'm going to do is just tin my iron here real quick, and then heat up the pad and apply a little bit of solder on here, and it will just flow right on. And the next one, I'm actually going to line this one back up a little bit. Alright. The contact time for these pads is going to be a little bit longer than it would be if you were soldering to components or something like that. Typically, you want to limit your contact time with a good iron. You don't like to go above 3 to 5 seconds for large pads such as these. Obviously, there's a lot of density to them. A lot of heat transference through the tabs as well, so you can be on there for a little while, but if you do apply too much heat, you can cause damage to the decoder, to the pads, and cause delamination or actually tear up the pads from the board. It's something which we see for warranties, and it's caused by too much heat, transferring too much heat from your iron into the board for too long. So you want to reduce your contact time and make sure that you tin your iron and you tin your pads and that you use your proper soldering techniques as well to minimize your chances of doing something adverse to the board. So our solder joints are now solid. So what I'll do is I'll take off this tape that I had put on here temporarily. Okay. So now this guy should be ready to go. If this were a normal decoder install, I would put the shell on at this point. But obviously this isn't just a decoder install. We also have our KA1 here that we're going to be installing. So what I'm going to do is prep the board now by tinning the two places that we're going to be tying our KA into. Number one of those is going to be this pad right here, which is the blue common, and then the other side is this edge of this capacitor. Now, if you're not proficient with soldering, we don't recommend that you do this. You may be able to find somebody who you know or a professional installer who can do this work for you if you're not comfortable with it, especially when it comes to milling and soldering to individual components as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to prep our decoder for the installation of the Keep Alive. And in order to do that, we're going to tin the 2 points that we're going to be connecting the Keep Alive to. Alright, so our next step in the installation is going to be to place the Keep Alive device in the rear of the locomotive. And to do that, I've decided to use a small little dot of hot glue rather than double-sided tape, because double-sided tape typically is rather thick, and since we're limited on our height at this point, my decision was to use the glue and just put a small dot on it and have it disperse out and hold it in there. So, I've got my device, a little Keep Alive one right here. I'm going to take my hot glue gun and just put a wee bit of glue on there. Just a little drop, okay. And then before it cools off, I'm going to go ahead and slide it right on underneath the decoder. Alright. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to trim the wires down to the proper length. We don't need all this extra wire in here. So I'm going to loop this around like this and grab my clippers. I'll leave a little bit extra here to work with so it's not impossible. Cut it right about at the edge of the board. Okay. Alright, so now that we have our wires cut to length, the next thing that we want to do is strip and tin them so it makes it easier for us to install them onto our pre-tinned pads over here. I'll grab my wire stripper. And I'm going to take about a 1/64 of an inch off, which is not much, but that's about all you need. You don't want any more than that really, because the heat from the soldering iron and the solder itself will shrink the tubing back just a wee bit, and with that you'll have more than enough wire to work with to solder onto these 2 points, and that leaves us not having any frayed wires or chances for it to short to other components and things of that nature, which could be very bad. So now that we've got them stripped, I'll go ahead and tin them by first hitting the iron and then feeding just a wee bit of solder on there. Okay. And this guy actually shrunk the heat shrink or the insulation back a little bit more than I wanted, so I'll take the excess and clip it off. And now we're going to go ahead and solder our wires on. Flip this around to make it easier, us left-handed people. Alright. Once again, just get a wee bit of solder there on the iron. You want to touch to the pad, not to the wire. Get it flowing. Okay. that wire's on. And the iron once again. And that's it. The wires are on there. We can tidy this up a little bit with a piece of Kapton tape to secure these wires in place. I'll bundle up the excess toward the front here, and we'll get a piece of tape, Kapton tape here. Cut off a short section. And then just put it right across to hold those wires in place. And that's it. We're done with the installation. So now I'll go ahead and pop the shell back on and we'll give her a run and see how it goes. Alright, so now that we've finished our installation, we've gone ahead and set up a short piece of track here to test with. Running on the TCS command station. I've got my throttle right here. And as you can see, I have control of the lights and I can run the motor as well. And if I pick it off the track, it keeps on going. So that's our Keep Alive at Work right there. And I'm really excited about this. I hope you're as excited as we are that this technology is out there and available for us N scalers out there. So if you want to see more content like this, if you're liking our new Keep Alives, let us know. Catch you next time.